Howdy, everyone. SandDAO podcast. This is SandDAO 69, and we're doing a SIP review of SIP-39, pausing the Sandbox DAO. Today is not a discussion, a read through, and a little bit of commentary. Disclaimer, I do not represent the Sandbox Game or the Sandbox Foundation. I'm not your financial or legal advisor. Nothing I say is to be taken as financial or legal advice. When I say the word SIP, I mean Sandbox Improvement Proposal. When I say the word DAO, I mean Decentralized Autonomous Organization. If I use the word SandFam, I'm talking about the Sandbox community, those who participate in the people, product, and purpose of the Sandbox ecosystem. That ecosystem looks a little bit like this, where you have in the people side, everything from the gamers of the Sandbox team. The product is everything from the game client to the DAO itself. Purpose is the white paper as expounded upon by Sebastian Bourget, Arthur Madrid, Yatsu. And that equals the ecosystem, which goes round and round each day. And today's episode is on the DAO. If you'd like to learn more about the ecosystem and the DAO and how it works, go to the DAO Education Hub in the Sandbox metaverse located at 2-154. It is in the bottom left of the map, right next to Jurassic World. My name's Lanzer, I'm your host, and I run the MetaWorlds group. We've done a number of things, a few experiences to include floor droppers. Also, we built the DAO Education Hub after winning an RFP from a SIP. And landowner, avatar holder, I've been part of Sandbox ecosystem since about 2021. Like I mentioned, today we'll be talking about SIP-39. We'll be doing a read-through of it. It traces all the way back to August 2025 of last year when Big Whale Gaming Daily, Kate Irwin, and they came out with some articles revealing that the sandbox had been realigned and that a new CEO came in from Animoca Brands, Robbie Young, stepped in order to synergize a new way forward for the sandbox, which through time we learned was Sandbox 3.0. So through some AMAs that happened the past couple months, mostly also the SIP-39 AMA that happened just a couple weeks ago. I did a couple of my last two episodes, SandDAO 67 and SandDAO 68. They were 67 was a commentary on the AMAs themselves, and 68 was an interview of Sebastian Bourget, who is now the global brand ambassador for the Sandbox, still the co-founder. So that was part two of an interview that we started back in SandDAO 8. We learned a lot about the new way forward from both of those episodes, and now is a read through of SIP-39 as it is now live on Snapshot. So that's what we're going to do here today is read through it. It'll be a little bit of commentary, but most of my commentary was done in SandDAO 67, and questions and answers and follow-up were SandDAO 68 with Sebastian Bourget. So without further ado, let's start. So SIP-39, pausing the Sandbox DAO, was put out by Arasakio, which is the DAO administrator company headed up by Cyril. We interviewed him not long ago. I think it was a few months ago. SandDAO 61-ish. It went live today. So the TLDR, the what? SIP-39 pauses the Sandbox DAO. No new SIP intake, no new funding decisions, and a shift to minimum maintenance mode to preserve assets and remain compliant. The why? The Sandbox is entering a new phase with the Sandbox 3.0, and this pause creates space to reassess the DAO's purpose an operating model before taking on any new commitments. And I'll be taking notes here so I can go back to it at the very end. The how. The pause is implemented via a formal SIP and vote. Responsibilities for finance, assets, and contracts transition to the Sandbox team. Active SIPs continue through the end of Q1 2026, where applicable. SIP-26, SIP-33, and SIP-36 are terminated, canceled. And now we get into the when. Effective date is 25th of February 2026, which is about when they estimate the SIP-39 is going to pass. So you can see down here in the bottom right, it is the exact day that the SIP would pass if voted yes. Transition period until 31 March 2026, dormant mode from 1 April 2026. Who? The Sandbox, in coordination with the Sandbox Foundation, implemented by the Sandbox and the Sandbox Foundation, with support from the DAO administrator through March 2026. Now we get into the SIP details section. Problem description. Since its inauguration in May 2024, the Sandbox DAO has built a community of thousands of members, authors, and voters from more than 20 countries to allocate sand in support of the Sandbox ecosystem, distributed more than 3 million sand across 38 SIPs, generated 8,000 forum posts and 500 threads, experimented with community governance and decentralized decision making. They're referring to the Sandbox DAO Grants Program, the SDGP. However, over that same period, we have identified the following challenges. The Sandbox ecosystem is rapidly evolving, and the types of initiatives supported by the DAO is not clearly aligned with those changes. With operating costs invoiced in USD euros, the decline in sand price means the DAO must spend more sand to cover the same fixed cost, making the current operating model materially more expensive. Continuing operations without an updated mandate risks further misalignment and value leakage. Pausing creates space to reassess how the DAO can best serve the community and ecosystem. Solution proposed. For the purpose of this SIP, paused DAO means 1. No new funding SIPs. No new grant SIPs or budget SIPs will be accepted, curated, or put to vote. 2. Existing SIPs. SIPs with signed contracts and or remain obligations will be either executed to completion or terminated in accordance with the relevant contract terms where a contract exists, such as notice period, pro rata settlement where applicable. SIPs without contracts and not yet started will be reviewed and closed where applicable during the transition period. Authors of the affected SIPs will be contacted directly by email during the transition period with a clear status outcome. Continue through Q1 2026 or terminate cancel. And the next operational steps. A consolidated status table will document outcomes SIP by SIP. Subsection 3. Governance bodies. No new governance initiatives. For example, special council, advisory board, or delegate elections, new mandates. Existing governance bodies will be discontinued or moved into a dormant role with no active mandate unless explicitly reactivated by a future SIP. Transition operations to the Sandbox team. Administrative activities will be transferred to the Sandbox and reduced to the minimum required to preserve the Sandbox Foundation's assets for it to remain compliant. As part of this transition, Arasaki will progressively hand over operational access for finance and asset tooling, including custody and banking and payment, accounting and reporting workflows, including subledger replacement plans, governance tools and infrastructure, such as snapshot admin, website, forum, DNS, etc. Arasaka will no longer act as the DAO administrator starting 31 March 2026. Arasaka will support the handover through that date. SIP impact. If SIP-39 is approved, the following applies. DAO activities pause. No new SIP intake, no new programs. Existing SIPs are handled per the rules above. Continue through quarter 2026 where applicable. Terminate, cancel, SIP-26, SIP-33, SIP-36. Responsibilities transition to the Sandbox team. Arasaka provides handover support through 31 March 2026. Benefit to the Sandbox ecosystem. Time and space to align with the Sandbox 3.0 vision. The Sandbox ecosystem is entering a new phase with the Sandbox 3.0, and a pause allows the DAO to reassess its purpose, structure, and tooling in light of where the platform is heading. Thus, any future activity can be designed to meaningfully support creators, players, builders in the context of the updated product vision. Avoidance of rushed or misaligned funding decisions. By halting new SIP intake and funding decisions, the DAO avoids committing resources to initiatives that may no longer fit the evolving ecosystem. This reduces the risk of funding projects that struggle to deliver impact or become obsolete shortly after approval. Responsible wind down of existing commitments. SIP-39 provides a structured approach to handling existing SIPs, allowing contracted or in progress initiatives to complete where appropriate, while responsibly winding down others according to their terms. This avoids abrupt disruption while still prioritizing clear scope and controlled commitments. Preservation of community assets and treasury value. Pausing SIP intake and DAO operations reduces the DAO's operational footprint. By limiting activity to only what is required for compliance and asset stewardship, more of the DAO's remaining resources are preserved for future use rather than consumed by ongoing operations. Risk analysis. Risk. Number one, confusion for the community. Why? DAO pause and SIP terminations may be perceived as deprioritization or closing the DAO. Mitigation. Communicate scope clearly, publish consolidated SIP status table, run one structured AMA. Risk number two, contractual disputes. Any termination of existing contracts can create legal risk. Mitigation. If applicable, follow contract notice terms and document pro rata closeout, direct outreach to affected authors. Risk number three, operational risk during transition. Why? Access, custody, banking, accounting, tooling changes. Mitigation is a structured handover plan through 31 March 2026. Minimal tools remain retained where needed. Risk number four, fragmented narrative across channels. Why? Is conflicting statements amplify backlash. Mitigation, single forum thread as a source of truth and limited spokespeople. Hmm. Okay, next section is budget requested, 44,400 USD. Cost of maintaining the DAO assets by Sandbox team for 1 year, expiring 25th February 2027. This will be supported by a specific service agreement between the foundation and the Sandbox. Hmm. Implementation plan section. Milestone number one, freeze new SIP intake. How do we measure success? No new SIPs accepted, processed after SIP-39 passes. Deliverables, update SIP intake guidance and forum notice stating SIP submissions are paused. Expected completion date immediately after vote concludes. Milestone 2, publish consolidated SIP status view. How do we measure success? Single shared reference for SIP status and next steps. Deliverables, consolidated SIP status table published on forum, which will include the SIP number, status, contract, yes or no, payments, and decision. Expected completion date immediately after vote concludes. Milestone 3, terminate SIP 26, 33, and 36 decisions. Decisions implemented cleanly and documented is the how do we measure success. Deliverables are SIP-26 termination notice and closeout plan, SIP-33 and SIP-36 close canceled before start, documented, and expected completion date is by February or March 2026 in line with contract terms. Milestone number 4, operational handover to the sandbox. How do we measure success? The sandbox has access and can operate. Deliverables is a access transfer completed checklist. When expected completion date is by 31 March 2026. Milestone 5, comms and channel posture. How do we measure success? Single source of truth and limited comms footprint. Deliverables, forum post, one structured AMA, and final summary of what changes, does not change. Expected completion date is March 2026. Milestone 6, dormant DAO begins. How do we measure success? DAO operations pause as defined in SIP-39. Deliverables is confirmation post, pause mods active, no new SIPs, operations handled by the sandbox starting 1 April 2026. Expected completion date 1 April 2026. All right, the next section is the team and author background is authored by the Sandbox in coordination with the Sandbox Foundation and implemented by the Sandbox and the Sandbox Foundation with handover support from the DAO administrator 31 March 2026. 2 votes registered as of right now, 13 days left, and it is currently the no vote with 3.7 million no votes and 188 yes votes. So right now it's 99% no and 0.01% yes. Although we know that's going to change because the Sandbox confirmed that they will be voting with their wallets, and we went over that AMA in our last episode. Okay, so there it is. There's the read through. I'm going to there's a few things that caught my eye that I'm going to go over, and then we'll conclude. So the first thing I noticed was where it said a shift to minimum maintenance mode to preserve assets and remain compliant. I think what they're talking about there is to register annually for a Sandbox or a foundation company in the Grand Cayman Islands. We went over the Grand Cayman Islands in depth in our foundation company mini series that we concluded with SandDAO 65. We interviewed a director, lawyers, and all that sort of stuff. So check that out if you're wanting to know a little bit more how foundation company is run. The next thing that caught my eye is when they mentioned reassess the DAO's purpose and operating model before taking on any new commitments. So as of right now, they could restrict new commitments in its current form. I went over this in SandDAO 35, where the old process was more of let's do this one. The old process was you submit a SIP, it goes through discussion, and the special counsel will issue a recommendation. It was very straightforward. There was nothing stopping you from submitting a SIP. However, the new process that came about in October 2024 increased it from about 150 days to 270 days and introduced a kind of gating where you post your SIP idea to the subforum and you only get to submit an actual SIP for voting if you're invited by the DAO admin team. So the step 3. If you're invited, in step 2, if you're invited in step 2 here, then you get to submit via the Typeform link, and then you go through DAO admin team review and comments, you get the recommendation, and then it goes to refinement, and then public discussion, and finally voting. So they already were able to restrict which commitments they take on if they really wanted to. And they were. I think I've authored maybe 7 or 8 SIPs. 2 or 3 of them passed. One of them did not pass. And so I know firsthand the amount of back and forth that goes along with the DAO admin team, and uh, they scrutinize it quite well. So they apply a lot of keen eye to whether or not it's going to help the community or if it's in line with the vision of the sandbox. So they already strictly control what SIPs go to vote. So that's why that one kind of struck me as weird, because their operating model already functions in a way where they can restrict taking on new commitments. Okay, they mentioned 3 SIPs that were particularly going to be terminated or canceled, and to I went over that in SANDDAO 67 a little quite in depth, but let's take a look here at what ones they're referring to. So it's SIP-36, which is the land estate sale, and I don't understand this one. This one was useful to the sandbox on the actual game. It wasn't useful to the DAO. It was just enabled by the DAO to give a highly sought after tool for people to trade and sell estates. Right now, you have to use some unsafe methods in order to do that, and a very, very long, cumbersome over the counter method. All of the safe methods that used to happen, like escrows, they are all they're gone. I know because I tried somewhat recently to buy an estate, and it was an extremely difficult process to do. So the only reason I got through is because I really wanted an estate. But this tool would have made that really simple. I could I could buy it really easily because it would integrate with the GBM, which currently handles the auctions for new land releases in the sandbox. So I have no idea why they would shut this one down. Why would they cancel it? This is useful and built into the Sandbox Games website. So there you go. SIP-33, the Sandbox Metaversity campus over in the Philippines. I guess I can kind of understand that one because it was more about bringing attention to the sandbox. And if they're pivoting away to AI and corners and sandchain, then that vision might be inconsistent with what the Metaversity campus was doing for SIP-33. I can understand that. The Metaversity campus it was more about Vox Edit and Game Maker and bringing people into the sandbox metaverse, which is now changing. And then SIP-26 was the NFT collection management for the Sandbox DAO. This is Arthmore and his team. They were strategically realigning the 1,000 assets for the Sandbox NFTs collection. It was worth about 1,000 ETH. And I don't understand why they stopped this one as well, because Arthmore, while they were funded by the DAO, they were successfully earning and paying their own bills with the realignment that they were doing. They had sold and liquidated about $400,000 worth and returned it back to the DAO so that it could be either acquire different sorts of art that's more culturally aligned with the sandbox, or if the DAO wanted to keep that money and repurpose it, then that was all part of the SIP to make as a community decision. Now that the sandbox is taking over, then or this SIP would propose that the sandbox takes over, so they could repurpose that as they need to. They were highly successful in meeting all of their target goals and objectives. So I'm not sure why they stopped this one either. Yeah. So I wish they had given that one a bit more thought, or maybe they did, but there's some reasons they're just not sharing. I gave them that feedback as well. I'm not sure why they wanted to do that. So, but there it is. It's still in the SIP after the discussion period. All right, the next part that caught my eye was when it talked about the sandbox ecosystem is rapidly evolving and the types of initiatives supported by the DAO is not clearly aligned with those changes. Okay, great. That's fine. Um, this SIP authorizes the termination and cancellation of other SIPs. So that means you're already evolving. So even if you continue the DAO, you can still cancel and terminate those SIPs if you really wanted to, and still keep the DAO going. So it's not quite clear to me why this would lead us to wanting to pause the DAO, where we already have a clearly defined restriction mechanism for new commitments, and this SIP would authorize the termination and canceling of other SIPs. You could still continue the DAO. So even if it's rapidly evolving, the community now can no longer rapidly evolve with it because it is now being paused and we can't vote on anything new. Governing bodies are being stopped. So that part doesn't make any sense to me. And the next one was a consolidated status table will document outcomes SIP by SIP. Thank you, Cyril and the DAO admin team for doing this. I'm looking forward to seeing this table. I have something to myself on my own that I put together that I'll be doing in my next episode, where I do a review of the entire Sandbox DAO. If this vote passes with a yes, then it'll be one of the final episodes, I imagine, where we just do a review of the Sandbox DAO in its entirety. And so this consolidated table will really help with that. But I think it's great that they're doing this because it kind of gives a little bit more transparency into how the DAO has done and what steps it's taken from SIP 1 all the way to SIP 39. So thank you. Thank you very much for doing that. And then the next thing is transition operations to the Sandbox team. That one is a little bit dicey because the Sandbox team was already involved. I think the more we learn about SIP 39 and people who've been paying attention to the DAO knows that the Sandbox team has had quite a bit of involvement thus far. So transitioning operations to the Sandbox team, um, right now it just seems kind of like a way for them to push it to the side, which is one of the risks that they mentioned, and I'll get into what I thought about that because there was one sentence there that I had flagged, but it looks like a way for the Sandbox team to kind of push it to the side and not really acknowledge the community on this one. And the only reason I say that is because I've been in the Sandbox community for quite a while, and the DAO was one of the first ways that a lot of community members felt like we could have a say in the Sandbox journey and really um, participate and in the discussion and the decision making, even though we didn't have any representation too much in the Sandbox special counsel or the advisory board because they were company nominated, which is why this part stuck out to me. We were looking forward to the elections to where we could nominate community members, and it's a bummer that that's the pausing of the DAO proposes a pausing of the governance bodies like advisory board and special counsel. Seb and I talked about this in SandDAO 68, where I asked him what was his understanding of why that was happening. He gave some really encouraging answers. I still don't like the fact that SIP 39 is doing this, but it was helpful to hear Seb talk about it. Yeah, for what it's worth, I understand. I still disagree with that as part of SIP 39, which is one of the reasons why I voted no. I want to continue the Sandbox DAO. Okay. So the next thing that stuck out to me was where it said, thus, any future activity can be designed to meaningfully support creators, players, and builders in the context of the updated product vision. There's nothing about continuing the Sandbox DAO that couldn't still do this. If we were to elect new special counsel and advisory board members who would then meet as a community each day and build in public, there's nothing that would stop us from designing and modeling our activity to support this new updated product vision. We would be in a better place to support the updated product vision because we're involved, because we can discuss and make our own decisions on community matters and retain people. But this SIP would pause all of that, and we would just kind of be in receive mode. It'd be a one-way street, kind of like it's been for a number of years. If you've been involved in the community, Unfortunately, the Sandbox team has kind of been a one-way street, which is why so many people, including myself, loved the DAO because it offered us a two-way street. And I really enjoyed the DAO, and so did many others. So I'd like to continue that because it's one of the few things we have where we feel heard as a community. The next thing that popped up in my on my brain was I read, by halting new SIP intake and funding decisions, the DAO avoids committing resources to initiatives that may longer fit the evolving ecosystem. Again, I already went over this. The current the current SIP process, where you must be invited by a DAO administrator or the DAO admin team in order to submit a SIP, and then it goes through a lengthy admin team review, which one of my SIPs is still stuck in admin team review because of the lengthy back and forth. And it was just clear that I wasn't able to convince the DAO admin team to let it go to special counsel recommendation and then to vote. It's just it was a well supported. A lot of people wanted it. Let's call it the sand chest, but it just the DAO admin team uh, did not let it pass the review because it had a lot of questions, and it didn't like the dollar figure. There's a lot of things that they um, a lot of back and forth on it, and I still feel that it was a good sip. It still is a good sip. It was very reasonable. However, the DAO admin team disagreed, so it didn't progress. So that's two steps that severely limits anyone's ability for to get it to vote, and for the DAO to commit those resources to initiatives that no longer fits the evolving ecosystem. Like I said, think I've authored 8 or 9 SIPs, and only four four of them went to vote. 3 of them passed. So one of them did not pass. So this is already true, and doesn't need to pause the DAO in order to make it any more true. Okay, by limiting activity to only what is required for compliance and asset stewardship, more of the DAO's remaining resources are preserved for future use rather than consumed by ongoing operations. I think this is the real reason why this is happening. If I had to guess, and being in the community now for 5 years and the DAO for a year and a half, I think this preserve for future use rather than consumed by ongoing operations is the real reason why they want to do it. Because the special counsel was compensated at 127 or 120,000 sand per person. That's times 5. Then you have, well, the advisory board was pro bono, so they were all not being paid at all. But then you had to pay the director for the foundation, you had to pay renewal fees, all this sorts of stuff. However, we already know that SIP-39 is requesting $44,000, right? Yeah, $44,000. So we know that it's going to, at least they consider that to be the minimum activity needed to continue. So I'm not quite sure what they mean by asset stewardship. Maybe they're talking about the NFT collection that Arth Mort and his team have been successfully stewarding in SIP 36. However, compliance, you can be compliant with what you had, but I think it's really about preserving the remaining sand for future use, which we heard from the DAO admin team that is about $800,000 left in today's exchange rate. Which, if I did some reverse math, let's try that. So about 800,000 sand, and sand is currently 8 cents. So it's about 10 million sand left. All right, so if you had a special council which had 120,000 sand times 5 people at 600,000. Okay. Yep. So that looks like maybe a major reason why the governance bodies are being shut down or paused, rather, because 800,000 sand at 0.08 is 10 million. Maybe they think that the 600,000 sand to pay special counsel is using too many resources for what they believe they'll get out of it. That to me is the best, the most what's the word? Charitable explanation, I think, for that. And if that's true, okay, I guess I can understand that. That's an argument to be made. But up until this point, there are a lot of uh, counterbalances to that I've already described. And the last thing that I noted while I was reading was this will be supported by a specific service agreement between the foundation and the sandbox. I wonder if they're referencing the current service agreement or if this is a new service agreement. I think I came to understand that there was a specific service agreement through the foundation of the sandbox. I think that was mentioned in one of the forum posts or on X. I can't recall where exactly. But if this is a new service agreement, then it's not clear to me why this support would be needed because the sandbox already had quite a bit of influence in the way the sandbox foundation ran. So uh, I don't know. It's just kind of scratching my head a little bit about that based on what I know about the DAO. And we read everything about the DAO, all of the memorandums, all the articles, the bylaws. We read the laws in the Cayman Islands surrounding it in our foundation miniseries. So we have a pretty good understanding of what what would be necessary and what's required to be compliant. An additional service agreement is kind of puzzling for that. So I think this SIP kind of gives a little more questions than it does answers. But as you saw mentioned a few times in SIP-39, one of the risks that they were mitigating against was the confusion, and the mitigation was to communicate the scope clearly. They would run one structured AMA, which they did, exactly one, and then down below, in order to mitigate fragmented narrative across channels, a single forum thread and limited spokespeople. So there were, I think, two spokespeople on the forums and then three spokespeople on the AMA. And other than communicating in the AMA and a few messages on the forums, there hasn't been much else to go off of for this SIP. It's just kind of like, here it is, now go vote. But also, the Sandbox DAO is going to vote with its 27 million wallet. So it's going to be difficult to overcome that. I'm going to do my best to get the word out and make a case for why we should continue the DAO. And as I mentioned in SandDAO 67, which is my reaction to the DAO pause and the AMAs, and then SandDAO 68, I'm of the opinion we should continue the DAO. We can continue the DAO and still meet the vision and evolve with Sandbox 3.0, and we can do so with our governing bodies. The community will feel more involved. It will be able to evolve faster, and it will, I think it's the right decision to make. So I voted no in order to continue the DAO. And there we go. I think that covers it. Okay. So that was a read through of SIP-39 and some commentary right after it. I normally go through Sandbox Spaces, forums, on Discord, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Here are the things I normally go over. And on the X Spaces, there's these three things: Bulls on the Block, Coffee with Captain, and Well members. We've covered them and interviewed most of them. And I'll take a quick peek at the Twitch to see if anyone is also hosting Sandbox so I can raid them. Or maybe I'm the only one. I am. So I will raid friend. And then we will conclude today. So that was SandDAO 69, a SIP review of SIP-39, which wants to pause the Sandbox DAO. I read through it, I gave some commentary. Thank you all for your time, and have a great day. See you in the metaverse.